Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest worked tirelessly with her husband for years to found and expand a multi-location orthodontic practice. But when their dream of selling their business ultimately came true, she found herself wondering, what next? One thing she knew intuitively was that she would have to give up drinking. But when her husband of 18 years suddenly left her, she had to reevaluate who she was and what she truly valued. She is now the founder of a company called EverBlume that curates small peer support groups for people struggling with addiction. And we talk here about what it really means to determine your own self-worth. Won't you please welcome Sonia Kahlon.
I'm from Toronto, Canada.
That's where you were born.
That's where I was born. I lived there for 20 years, and then I moved to Boston for school, and then I moved to Pittsburgh for school, and then I moved to Philly to start working. And so now I'm in rural Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. And so growing up, were you in like a cocktail-y culture or?
Yeah, so Indian people have a really interesting, I'm Indian, not anyone can tell because we're on Zoom, but
Right.
Yeah, they have a really interesting relationship with alcohol. So, I mean, the men especially.
And so are your parents, were they born in India or?
Yes.
Right.
And
so when did they move to Canada?
So they moved in like the 60s.
Wow. What made them leave India? I know this has nothing to do with you, but it's interesting.
No, I mean, I think that there is always, especially 60s, 70s, 80s. I feel like now there's a lot going on in India. So people are getting really good jobs but I think in that time, it was just like you go to start a better life and to give your kids a better life. And so I think it was just sort of like, if you can, you do.
Right. How cool. And what kind of work were they doing in America?
Yeah, so
or Canada, I guess.
My dad was like a chemist and a physicist, and so he ended up teaching. My mom was 19 when they got married, so I think she came and like finished high school and took like a lab tech course, and she was a lab tech.
Cool. And so and their relationship with alcohol, you were saying the men in India have a distinct relationship with booze.
Yeah, or Indian men have a distinct relationship with booze. Like that social relationship is dramatic. Like there is so much, when they get together, there's so much drinking. Like I think it was confusing for me to understand what a drink was because they would like fill their glasses with like Johnny Walker to like almost the top. And so I was like, oh, that's a drink. And so my dad would say, I only had one drink. And I'm like, dude, I think you had like 7 drinks, like one glass, but you had 7 drinks. And
would he be hammered? Like when you were a kid, would you see him just like?
Yeah. I mean, he was actually not as bad as most of my uncles, my grandpa, and cousins. My dad was actually pretty tame, I think.
And they were all in Canada? Your whole family was there?
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
They were all there.
And was it a pretty tight-knit Indian community that you were in, or was it pretty diverse, or what was sort of the?
Yeah, so I think my parents came so early that they really assimilated. Like they wanted to assimilate. So we didn't move to like the Indian areas. We didn't like show our Indianness that much. And so there were different areas in Toronto that were really Indian, and that's where we would go to meet, like when they wanted to go out with their friends or their friends' houses. But we lived in a predominantly white area. Right.
Interesting. And so, and did your mother drink, or do Indian women, what's the story there?
So I think now it's totally normal for Indian women to drink, but back then, no, my mom didn't drink at all until, I don't know, maybe I was like, I didn't know of her to drink until I was in my 20s, probably.
Right. And so when did you have your first drink?
I had my first drink probably when I was like 15. I just was like such an anxious kid. And so I just was like this little kind of runty, like Indian kid. And so I had just this intense amount of anxiety. Also, like my home life was pretty chaotic. And so, yeah, I think I had something happen. I forget what it,
Are you an only child or multiple
no,
children?
I have an alcoholic brother.
Right.
Yeah.
Is he
So
older or younger?
not much old. He just turned 50. He's 6 years old.
Right.
So yeah, I think someone offered me a drink, like a boyfriend, and I was like, oh, I'll try it. And I was just like the heavens opened up. Like it was just like, oh my God, like I haven't been able to breathe until this. Like I didn't ever remember feeling so calm.
Right.
And so that I think is it, right? If you're that
Right.
person that gets that reaction from drinking, that's it. And so I was like hooked. I loved it. And so I really learned to use it to relax. And so we had this huge bar in our basement. We always, every house we moved into, my dad would build this huge, like dramatic bar.
Right.
And so yes, I think after everyone would go to bed, I would like pour myself like from the bar, and I would like watch Dallas or something. And yeah, and that continued until
what would you drink?
Whatever was there. So I'm very like non-discriminate like drinker at that time. And so if there was like gin there, I would drink it. If there was whiskey, I would drink it. And yeah, and then after a couple years, I went to college and I became just like a prolific binge drinker.
Were you a like good student in high school and stuff?
Yeah.
So where'd you go to college?
So I went to University of Toronto. And yeah, it's super, super important, right? Like for Indian people to be super educated. And so
what were you studying?
So of course I was studying biochemistry, and there's not a lot of options for Indian kids. And my parents were like, you can be a pharmacist, a doctor, or a dentist. And so I became a dentist. And so that's by doing all those things, like following sort of the steps, I was able to hide my drinking pretty easily.
So you went to University of Toronto to study biochemistry, and then what's the sort of educational track that you go on to become a dentist?
Yeah, so I studied, did my undergrad, and then you apply to dental school and you do that for 4 years.
Wow.
And then you can apply to a specialty. And I did that for 3 years, and I became an orthodontist. And so all the while, really nurturing a pretty significant alcohol problem. But as long as I kept doing those things, nobody really got in my way.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, it's I feel like it's a story that isn't told enough, that like, the alcoholic works so hard to keep everything together so that they can drink as much as they want, and that like the high functioning alcoholic is like really just sort of creating this facade so that everyone will leave them alone so they can drink, And so when you were in college, were you a partier, or were you just were you very social, or was it more?
Yeah. So for once kind of in my life, I was drinking so much. I was very popular, very social, and it was all brand new to me. I was like, I could fit in with so many different groups of people. And so it really sort of like smoothed out those like the rough edges that I normally would have in like social interactions. And so that's sort of what I learned was, if I want to socialize and I want to be funny and I want to be like easygoing, and then I should be drinking. I should be drinking heavily.
And were there any like consequences during that period for your drinking? Like,
yeah, I mean, we were all really heavy drinkers. Partly also the drinking age in Canada is 19. So we were drinking like on campus. It wasn't like we had to hide it or anything. Like we were ordering kegs. And so, yeah, I mean, I sort of thought, well, everyone's getting really drunk. Everyone's sort of throwing up in the stairwell. But yeah, I mean, I had my stomach pumped. That's not normal. I don't think that's normal. Yeah, I would lose my keys, my wallet, things like that. But I think I would sort of turn them into like funny things, or my friends would turn them into this funny thing. And so, yeah, the stomach pumping like led to some really interesting nicknames for the rest of college. And so, yeah.
And then, and so you make it through those 2 graduate programs pretty, like that. Are people aware that you have a drinking problem, or are they sort of?
So dental school was so hard that I kept my drinking. That was the only time I really had major gaps. And so I would pretty much stay sober until all my exams were over. And then I would like binge. And then I would stay sober until we had exams again. The exams were like 4 times a year. So 4 times a year, I would have a massive binge, massive. Would end in like getting something pierced or like, and then I would be super depressed after that much drinking. And so yeah, I took this like kind of like a 4-year break until
and then you get out of school, and what happens? Do you start a practice or join a practice? Or
so I get out of school and I start a practice, and I start drinking every night. And so I start drinking wine every night
and just, I'm curious, when you're starting a practice, like, do you take out a loan? How does that work? Do you have, and is it hard to find a client base, or?
No. So I sort of knew it was me and my ex-husband and at the time he was my husband. And we just sort of like, we're like, let's just do this. We thought we had an idea that where we were going to open, there were going to be clients. And so we opened the first practice, and then before I knew it, we had 7 practices.
Wow.
I was a full-blown alcoholic. And I got so lucky that a private equity firm came calling and said, I think we'll buy you. And I was like,
where were you based? Were you in Boston or where?
In Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania. Wow.
Yeah.
So how many people did you have working for you?
Under 50.
Right. But so 7 practices, that's 7 different places, 7 different offices.
Yeah. 7 different offices.
And are you, and are they all like orthodontists, or is it? Yeah. Right. Wow. What a good business. And is your husband at this point, is he a drinker?
He is a weed smoker. And for some reason I was like, well, that's he's lucky. Like that's so much easier. You don't have hangovers, and it's not as tough on your body. And I remember just never thinking he had a problem, even though he's high all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of believe that like weed smokers and alcoholics should never get together. It's like cat lovers and dog lovers. They're just they don't mix ultimately.
Yeah, true.
And so talk me through a little bit of your like drinking habits. So you're starting this practice, and I assume it's stressful, and you're going home and drinking every night, basically.
Yeah, and I'm working a ton. And so the drinking was sort of like confined to like 3 hours a night. And so I would just drink until I passed out every night, and I would be hungover every day. And so, that went on for honestly like about a decade that I was drinking every night. And, only really, I would try to go a day without drinking, and I just couldn't. Like I would quit every morning. I'm like, I quit. This is crazy. And by every evening I would be drinking again. And so I think also that, I don't know if you feel this way. I feel like when you start drinking so early, like I hadn't dealt with anything. Like I hadn't dealt with any trauma. I hadn't learned any coping mechanisms. I didn't even know who I was, I think it's in some way.
It's funny. I just celebrated 12 years of sobriety. I'm 52. So 12 years, that's 40 years. And I think I started drinking when I really started drinking when I was, say 14. So I feel like half my life I've been sober and half my life I was drunk, but I feel like finally after 12 years, I have a sense of who I am, which like I really didn't when I got sober. I was like, wow, I don't even know what I'm interested in. Like what is going to, how am I going to fill this time? Like, what do I want to do with this time that I now have, And so what kind of compelled you to stop ultimately?
So we sold the business, and it was like just such a like transitional point like in my life. Like I had never really had financial security. It never like that is such a success that it was just like, wow. And I knew though that
the private equity firm that bought you guys out, didn't they want you to stay on and manage it?
Yeah, for sure, for a couple of years. But it was like 9 to 5. And
and the pressure's off you. Like
the pressure's off. And so I remember thinking like when these 2 years were up, I don't know, I have no idea what I want to do, but I know I don't want to do that again. But
like
I had
build another practice from scratch.
No. And between like the pressure from my parents and then sort of like landing in this like crazy environment, I just was like, I don't even know what I want to do. Like, I don't even know. I was never given an option. And so I just was like, okay, well, if I have more free time, I am going to start drinking earlier. And I knew that. I had known for a few years that I had a problem. But my brother was like a pretty low functioning alcoholic. And I was like, always like, I'm not that bad. I'm not that bad. No one's really going to think I have a problem. And I'd just been thinking about it for a couple of years and then more intensely for a couple of months, realizing that things could go really bad if I didn't. And, I sort of like in my mind was like planning for this like extreme discomfort for a few months. And then one day I had a really, really bad hangover and I was out with a girlfriend of mine for brunch and she was pregnant, so she wasn't drinking. And the waiter was like, do you want a mimosa? And I was like, I don't know. It's like everything flashed in front of my eyes. I was like, if I have a mimosa, well, I'm going to have like 3. And then I'm going to get home and it's like mid-afternoon. I have to keep drinking or I'm going to start getting hungover. And then, when around dinner, I can like switch to wine and I'm going to get really hammered. And then I'm going to have a hangover for like 2 days or 3 days. And I think it just clicked like in that moment. And I said, I don't want a mimosa. I went back home and I was like, I'm not going to drink tonight. I'd done that a million times. And it just, for some reason that day, it just took. I didn't know if I would drink the next day, but I thought I'm just not going to drink tonight because I feel so sick that this is crazy that I've been drinking through these hangovers.
And at that point, how much time is left on your contract with the
at that
company?
point, the contract is basically up.
Right.
The contract has like maybe a year left. And maybe like, basically kind of like winding it down. Maybe
consulting kind of for a year or something. Did you go to meetings? Did you go get like 12-step meetings or no? You just stopped like that?
No. So I talked to my brother a lot and he was like in AA. He had been in AA for 5 years and that was so helpful. And then I wanted to go to AA meetings. So I said to my ex, I was like, I think I want to go to meetings. And he was like, you can't, like, you are like, no, you have too much to lose if somebody,
like you're the face of this company.
I think it was a combination of that. I think that his impression of alcoholics was really bad. I think that he thought every alcoholic was like my brother. And he just didn't want me like bringing home like some riffraff, I think. Like, and I was like, I think I was just like, okay, you know what? I'm just fine. I won't go. And
that's
I read
amazing. Is he Indian or is he?
No, he's Jewish.
No. He's what?
He's Jewish.
Jewish, right?
Yeah.
How interesting. I mean, I love that. And then, and so, I mean, because like, whatever, I mean, I didn't really know about AA. I'm violating my own rules here, but like, when I got sober, I had a friend who was sober. And so I called him and I was like, what do I do? And he was like, stop drinking, start counting your days, and I'll take you to a meeting. And I was like, okay. So I went to this meeting and I was like, I had a pretty healthy sense of my own importance at that point. And, you know, I was a film executive, and I was like, you know, I've got, in my mind, a high profile job. I mean, it really wasn't, but I was like, yeah, you know, I'm a big time movie guy, and like, I don't know if I can, you know, I mean, if people see me, that's going to be awkward. And, the first meeting I went to was immediately recognized by someone who was like a struggling writer in the business. And I was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. And like, it was exactly the kind of person that I did not want to be seen by. Someone who in my mind was like lower status than me. I mean, these are all embarrassing things to say, but like, that's the way I felt. And he was totally sweet. And he gave me, he was the literature guy at that meeting. And, you know, they have they've got like the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then they have like these other books, like the 12 traditions, and which is called the 12 and 12. And he gave me the 12 and he gave me both those books. And whatever, I guess I had to pay for them, but I immediately went out of town to work on a film. And this movie, Fat Kid Rules the World, that I was a producer on. And I wasn't going to go to meetings during this production because I hadn't really been to many meetings. I didn't even know how to find them or anything. But thankfully, I had those books. And whenever I was like lost or confused or frustrated or thinking I might drink again, I would read those books. And I owe that guy for that. I mean, I can't even remember his name. I've seen him a couple times over the years since then and thanked him. But yeah, I definitely had that same sense, that stigma of like, ew. I used to joke about it that like, I would rather, I used to do stand-up, and I would say, I mean, my first set, I was like, I would rather tell people I'm going to a Craigslist hookup than I am an AA meeting. Like, there's a reason that shit's anonymous.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I know. I think he was worried about maybe like a old patient seeing me, and then there's like a liability issue.
Right. Sure.
Drunk when she was in. It's like, no, but yeah, I agree. Like, I think at that point, I was starting to feel it because my brother was like out and proud, like that he was, you know, in recovery. And so I knew it was possible. I was like, it's gonna be something that I can say really easily. But yeah, it took a while. And then I started going to some online meetings, like
so you did eventually go to meetings.
A few years. So about 2-3 years later,
right.
My brother had a bad relapse. And so all of a sudden my support system was gone. And I'm dealing with like just being so devastated by this relapse. And he had stopped talking to me. And so my husband was out of town, and I was living in New York, and I thought, I'm going to go to some AA meetings while he's gone.
Right.
So I tried a few, like I lived in Tribeca. So I tried the Tribeca one, I tried the Soho one, and I was like, yeah, the people are nice, but I don't think this is for me. Like, I don't think the format is for me. I just want to talk to other people who have gone through this. I don't want this sort of formal steps. And so, and also it's like I came in 2-3 years sober.
Yeah. Totally.
Sort of like, I don't know I don't want to do this. No. Like I have a problem. I got it. Like, so then I started going to online, like non-12-step meetings, and just couldn't really just didn't take it that seriously. I would go for a couple of months and I would just be like, I don't know. Everyone's just super new. Like everyone's just getting sober. And I don't know, I don't have that much to talk about. And so it wasn't until 5 years, I celebrate 5 years. And a week later, my husband gets up and leaves after 18 years.
Wow.
No warning. Why? He had been having since the sale, right? He had been hadn't been really able to find his footing. Like he was that guy, like that his identity wrapped up in a really successful business owner. And so he just would try things and they wouldn't work out, or he just was kind of paralyzed. And I was doing all the sober things by this point. I'm like volunteering, I'm writing about my sobriety, I'm hanging out with my nieces. And, because I didn't want to be around them. I remember when I was drunk. And so all of a sudden I'm super close with my family. And so he had stopped smoking weed, but never really done any work around it. Right. Like just kind of, I guess I'll stop. So in the days sort of leading up to it, like we were fine. Like we were talking, we were walking our dogs, we were having dinner. And he was just like, I'm really depressed. I'm really just, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what my purpose is in life. I just don't know. And then I guess he woke up one morning and decided that the problem was me. And I couldn't, the shock, like I can't even, the shock, it doesn't even begin to explain how I felt. Like it was so devastating. And I didn't even believe it was real for a while. He said a couple of things on the way out, and those are what really put the nail in the coffin. And he said, look, like you're different now. Like you don't want to go out as much.
Right.
You are happy with your family. You don't feel the need to, expand your social circle that much. You're happy with the amount of money we have. And he's like, you're just happy with too little. And this isn't what I want. Like, and you asshole, like, oh my God. Like, but I remember not thinking it. I remember actually thinking like, oh my God, like, how do I get unhappy? Like, how can I be like, how do I get unhappy with this? And I was like, it's just like, there was no explanation for me, like, and there was no solution. And so but the solution I thought to this pain would be drinking. I thought it would be a great time to start drinking.
Yeah.
I was in so much discomfort, like physically. I just was like, I know 100% that alcohol will fix this temporarily.
Right.
And I wasn't going to journal my way out of it. I wasn't going to, none of that. Like I wasn't going to do yoga. It wasn't going to, fix this. And I just like so desperately wanted a break from being so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I remember I was like walking my dogs. He left me with our two dogs and on the Hudson. And I was like, I'm going to end up drinking because I am not eating. So I'm hungry. I'm a little bit angry. I'm lonely, and I'm not sleeping. I'm tired.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was a like quad trifecta of disaster. And so I got back to my apartment that morning and I went to a meeting a friend had told me about online. And so I went to the meeting every day at 8 a.m. for a couple of months. And it was just so comforting, like to have people that were just like, trying to maintain sobriety. And it was just so comforting.
Was this during the pandemic?
No, this is after the pandemic.
Right.
And so, it was just really nice. And then, the meetings were just so huge. They were like 220 people. And I thought at some point I was like, I think I'd like to talk, but I'm not going to talk in this environment because I am like, more introverted. And so, and I also thought, I'm like, I don't want to vent. Like, I don't want to get up there and be like, my husband left, I feel like drinking. And then like, next, then I wanted like feedback really badly. So so that's sort of what I decided. I was like, I need something different. This isn't 100% working. And it's like the nuance too, of my situation was like, he had essentially left because I got sober. Right.
Sure.
And I sort of wanted to talk about it in a more intimate setting.
Right. And so what sort of solution did you find for that?
So, I just kind of like started like journaling a bit and saying like, what do you want? Like, what kind of sober support is it? Because you have these, I have two amazing sister-in-laws who would have done anything for me. And were checking on me all the time, but I didn't have any sober friends. I'd come back to Pennsylvania from New York. And so I thought, I took a trip. My sister-in-laws were like, you need to go somewhere. And so I took a trip to Costa Rica and I was miserable. I was just like, I can't believe I'm here. Like, this sucks. And then I think I woke up after like on the second day and was like, okay, it's time to like start living again. And I just started thinking about my sobriety and I just started kind of mapping out like, what is the ideal group? Like, what group are you looking for? And so I said, okay, I'm looking for all sober people. I'm looking for something like maybe under 15 people. people. I'm looking for people who I have something in common with, right? So I don't want everyone to be in the first like 90 days or 6 months. I want someone who's like experiencing some sort of challenge to their sobriety, but they have some sobriety time. And so, yeah, I just kind of thought about it. I'm like, okay, so it's a group. And then I thought, what other kind of groups could there be? And I was like, I had job burnout. That could have been, that would have been really nice to have some support during that time of other people that were sort of going through the same thing. And so, yeah, I looked for it and I did some research and I couldn't find it. And I was like, really? Like, how does this not exist? Like, and, as I started to get better after a few weeks, I started like talking to my sister-in-laws and I was like, I think I want to build this. Like, I think I want to use like the tools I have from, starting a business. And I think I want to build this. And I think that, that something like this could save my life. Like I was in really bad shape. And so, yeah, I just slowly started talking to tons of people in recovery and asking them like, what do you want in a meeting, or why don't you go to meetings? What would make you go? So, yeah.
And that's the business you have now. And what's it called?
It's called EverBlume.
EverBlume. Oh, right. That's how I booked this podcast. And so, and how does it work?
So my idea was, it's not going to be a drop in. It's going to be consistent people every week. And so we sort of match groups, right? And so not demographically, but sort of in like what they're going through. So there's like multiple groups of people in the first 6 months. And we have like different groups, people going through a life transition. And so that's basically how it works. And I don't know if I even had conceptualized like what it would look like, but like they're so close. Like after a few months, they are so close. And yeah, they have slips and they have falls and they have like, but they're like really like cheerleaders for each other. And they'll come in and be like, hey, Sherry, how's your mom? I know she was in the hospital. And like, you don't know that about people in other meetings.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I started doing this podcast was because I would be in a meeting and someone would be in there and they would say, they would talk about their bottom and then they would talk about where they are now. But there was so much work to sort of protect their anonymity that it was hard to get specific. Like, well, what kind, are you a plastic surgeon? Or, like just, and like, for me, I've always been interested in a story, like a life story, and how does recovery, what sort of role did recovery play in shaping that story? More than like doing this podcast because, it's less about helping people and more about just hearing people helping me.
Yeah. Really I always feel like I'm on a podcast. It's like going to a meeting with one other person.
It is. I mean, sometimes I'm like, people are like, oh, have you been to a meeting this week? And I'm like, no, but I did a podcast. So like I had a big dose of like, what you're looking for, that kind of like give and take, that intimacy, that sharing of an experience that you can really get into. And, whatever. I mean, there's lots of different ways to support your sobriety, whether it's with 12-step meetings or sobriety coaches or this community that you're building. And so how do people find your support system?
So just go to joineverblume.com and you can sign up and come to a free meeting to check it out before sign up for anything, just to make sure, because that format is not necessarily for everyone. Some people do want that really strong anonymity. This is like for people who really want to actively participate. Like, you don't have to say what you do for a living, but if it's part of your story, you should, and so that's actually, it's interesting. A couple of months in, I was like, how do I have 7 healthcare workers in this out of 15 people in one of my groups? And I was like, that should be its own group.
Yeah. Right.
Healthcare workers are so uncomfortable.
So much stress. Yeah, I bet.
And they have a really unique type of stress that I think they can talk to each other about that no one else fully understands when you're like public facing in that way. So I thought that was and like the longer like I do this, the more I'm like, there are some really interesting people with some, that have things in common that I could kind of like spin off and give them their, have them
Right.
have their own
How
group.
many people are in your community at this point, would you say?
So
Do you know?
now probably have around 60. And so
Right.
that's probably 4 or 5 meetings. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's amazing. It's like,
And do you participate in every meeting or no?
yeah, for now,
Right.
I mean, I have other coaches kind of like ready to go. But
Right.
I kind of really like it for now, as long as I have time, which I don't think I will for much longer. But yeah, I don't participate as a member. I participate sort of as a more of like a coach, I think.
Facilitator, kind of, yeah.
More of a facilitator. I try to keep things like from going off track. And I think that sometimes when it is a back and forth conversation, it can go off track. And so a couple of ways.
I mean, I think because there is, whatever, there's just people don't always understand each other. I mean, even you see it. I mean, I see it a lot in 12-step meetings where there's this like, there's this literature and everyone interprets it differently, and, so, which is, sort of the way it works is like, I mean, like whenever I need to help someone get sober, I do what was done to me, and that's sort of the way. But everyone sort of comes at it from different points of view, and so
I actually think it's like the opposite issue I'm having, where they kind of feed off each other.
Oh, right. So interesting.
If one of them starts talking about like, oh, maybe you should try naltrexone. You should try medication. And the next person will be like, I'm on naltrexone. You should definitely be on naltrexone. Like, we're not here to talk. Like, that's a fair conversation.
Sure.
But I don't think it's like not necessarily the conversation we need to have in a support group, right? Like,
yeah. It's interesting.
A lot of naltrexone talk in general. I feel like in the recovery community in the last couple of years.
Naltrexone is what exactly? Is that the one that stops you from craving alcohol?
Yeah.
Right. I've never taken it.
I think they use it also for like people with like overeating issues. I think it takes away the craving too for that.
Right. And are you in touch with your ex at all?
So he left that day and I never saw him again.
No.
Ghosted.
Wow.
So yeah, we spoke for a couple of weeks and it just kept getting like less and less. And I was getting like deeper into this hole. And he just at some point just stopped like responding. And I remember just being like, 18 years doesn't end like this, right? That's not possible. Like how is that even possible? And so he disappeared. He disappeared from my life, from all of our friends, even his friends, like people that he was closer to, ended up, they're my friends now because he has disappeared. He's disappeared off the face of the earth, essentially. And so
weird. Wow. I guess that's what he wanted.
I guess that, what he wanted was the new relationship that he was in while we were still together. And so I think that sort of, I don't know if he's embarrassed about how he acted. I don't know.
Or just wants to like, can't deal with it, accept it, take responsibility for it. So it's just like, close the door on it.
Yeah. I've never told really anyone this on a podcast, but the hangover I had that made me get sober was from hanging out with that woman and her husband.
Oh, no way. Right.
Yeah.
And you were like, wow. You had no idea though.
No, so it could have been going on 5 years. I don't know. I have no idea. But
when did you find out?
When he stopped contacting me, I started, like, my sister-in-law started doing some research into like what was going on. And then somebody told me. Right. I was talking to somebody, and not someone he had told, someone who had sort of figured it out, said, hey, I saw this come across. I don't know if it was like not a social media thing, but yeah. And so that's how I found out. And then I was like,
enough of that.
Huh. Yeah. But so it was interesting because so essentially, right, like he was looking for that lifestyle. Like this is someone, he ended up with someone who drinks a lot, who goes out almost every night. And I think that gives me some peace, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like you guys were on different trajectories. I mean, it was interesting when I stopped drinking, my wife was, I mean, we had a very intense social life. We still do, but like a huge part of that was drinking. And when I was like, I'm going to stop drinking, I remember her face was not thrilled. It wasn't like, oh, this is what we've been waiting for. It was like, wait, really? Like, you're just going to walk away from this huge part of our life? And I was like, yeah. And, I think she was worried that like I would ultimately be interested in other things and whatever, that I would change so radically that it would no longer make our relationship tenable. I mean, that's not what happened. I mean, but you certainly evolve and change in a relationship. And, that's part of the interesting part of it, but there are times I think when people, certainly when drugs and alcohol are involved, like, I mean, it's clearly for the better that like, that's the road. You were obviously not going to be a partner on that path. So
no. And it's interesting that same thing, I guess, with your wife, that your drinking wasn't having consequences in the relationship enough. He never was like, I think you should stop drinking, like never said anything, because I think I was sort of channeling it into like, being fun socially, and like, I wasn't having huge consequences that he would have had to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. And whatever, there's, I think, sometimes in a relationship, it's nice when you can both have a drink and turn off all of the intensity of whatever's going on, and like the idea that you were never going to get that break again. I mean, and I think sometimes it is exhausting because I don't turn off. Like I am always like, it's always pretty intense with me.
I feel the same. So that's how I felt. Like I remember thinking, like I just wanted a break from the pain, and I was like, am I just never gonna get that? Like, is this just gonna keep rolling like this? And I remember saying to someone, I was like, I've been like sad for over a year. Like I haven't had a moment. I mean, I've had moments of joy, but like it's really interesting. I haven't been able to turn off for like an hour or two.
I mean, now I meditate. I play a lot of tennis. Like I get a lot of like relief from playing tennis and like whatever. I enjoy work and creating things in my work. But yeah, I went through some difficult work stuff in like a month ago, and I would have loved like just the idea that the only thing that was going to improve the situation was time. I felt like was just getting, just waiting for things to change and my perspective to change, and hoping that was the case. But, I had about 3 days where I was so intensely just angry and disappointed with the people I was working with. And, I was like, will I ever feel better, And, I think that that's one of the things that I've certainly taken a lot away from 12-step meetings, not only being able to go and say, hey, this is what's going on, and other people sharing their wisdom, but then just, a lot of the like life lessons that like things are cyclical, and what the things that are good right now are going to be bad, and the things that are bad right now are going to be good. And, you just have to kind of be on board for that ride. I get a lot of peace from that, just knowing that things are going to change. And sometimes, there's that other thing that when things are great and you're like, I have to enjoy this because it's going to go by, like it's going to be gone, and something else great will come along, but it won't be this particular thing. So and I have to say, there's been a lot of great things that have happened to me in sobriety, and I've been so thankful that like I was completely present for them. Like there was nothing, there was, with every great thing, there's bad things. And with every bad thing, there's great things. And it was still that mix, but I was there for it in a way that had I been drinking, I wouldn't have been there for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think like feeling this and like healing from it without alcohol is like, it's been amazing. Like I can't imagine where I would be if I had started sort of like numbing it even a little bit. as the months went on. And so now it's like, I feel super clear about what I want out of my life. I feel super clear about my purpose, which I don't know you necessarily, because there's almost like there's not that pressure, right? So as the months went on, I felt pressure to like rebuild my life. I was like, God, let's rebuild this. Like we got to do something. So yeah, I think it makes you like slightly more like focused or motivated in a way. I don't know.
I think what you said just about being clear about, you know, I also like have clarity about some of the things that have gone wrong, and I'm okay with them. Like they went wrong, and like I don't have to blame myself. I don't have to blame anyone else. It's just sometimes it's what happened, you know. And it's not necessarily everything that happens isn't necessarily a reflection of me or my self-worth, really. I mean, that's another thing that I've learned just recently in recovery, that like my success and my failures and the way people are happy or mad at me doesn't necessarily reflect who I am or what I'm really my self-worth, like how I feel about myself.
I mean, that is like one of the biggest lessons I learned from this. And I didn't believe it. I just kept going around and around thinking, what could I have done differently? Why would someone leave? Like, why would this happen? And my sister-in-law said, like, this is a reflection of who he is, not of who you are. Totally, and I was like, whatever. Like the first one, I was like, whatever. No, like maybe I am kind of boring. Maybe I do kind of, maybe this. And I remember she would say it over and over. Like every time I would sort of beat myself up, she would say it over and over. And also, she said too, the person that like usually that they end up with is also, it's a reflection of how they're feeling. It's not about that person either. It's a reflection of how they feel about themselves. And so that's given me a lot of comfort. I feel like that it's not a reflect. I mean, I would still say I have bad moments where I think it is a reflection of me. But yeah, like it's Memorial Day. I'm not going to be getting wild at a party tonight. You know, like I'll go out, I'll hang out with people, but yeah, it is a reflection of that person.
Well, and the other thing about AA is like we claim, there's the expression that we claim spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. And I think that that's true too. It's like, you know, we're getting better. We don't have to be perfect. So anyway, Sonia, this was great. I really enjoyed sitting down with you. Thank you so much for reaching out and setting this up. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. You too. I love the podcast. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.